Raised by wolves with canine DNA in his blood, having trained more than 24,000 pets, helping you and your fur babies thrive. Live in studio, it's Pet Talk Today with Will Bangura, answering your pet behavior and training questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host and favorite pet behavior expert, Will Bangura.
Good day, pet lovers. Hey, how you doing? How's your afternoon going? I'm Will Bangura from the Saturday morning video podcast here live on Facebook, Pet Talk Today. No, it's not Saturday, but I am streaming live right now. This is going to be a special episode, a special video, a special podcast of Pet Talk Today. I want to talk in depth about how do you help the aggressive dog? How do you help the reactive dog? How do you help the dog that has anxiety? How do you help the dogs that have fears and phobias? Maybe it's thunderstorms, fireworks. Maybe it's aggression towards people or other dogs. Maybe it's separation anxiety. Maybe there's other fears and phobias or aggression towards other dogs that are strangers. Maybe your dog's aggressive or fearful towards somebody in your house. Counter conditioning and desensitization is the gold standard. They are the tools that are used, and you need to understand those tools of counter conditioning and desensitization. If you have a dog that has emotional issues, now granted, we oftentimes are thinking just about the behavior. Right? The outward behavior. What outward displays of anxiety, fears, phobias, reactivity, or aggression does your dog display? So for an aggressive dog, we might say they would be barking. Maybe they're lunging. Maybe they're air snapping. Maybe they're actually biting. Okay? Maybe their hackles are up. Maybe they're showing their teeth. Maybe you notice their ears are up and straight. Maybe you notice the tail is up and straight. Maybe you notice that their pupils are dilated. Maybe you notice the corners, the whites of their eyes, whale eye. These are all behavioral displays, as well as canine body language cues. And oftentimes we're thinking about those things. The dog that is fearful, that has a fear of fireworks or thunderstorms or other noise sensitivities. The outward behavior might be trembling, trying to run away, might be a tucked tail, might be a dog that is panting, pacing, drooling, might be a dog that has dilated pupils. So we might see some different outward behaviors. You might see a dog that has separation anxiety, panting, pacing, drooling, vocalizing, barking, whining, crying. We may see outward behavior of the dog with separation anxiety trying to escape. And we focus on those outward behaviors because it's those outward behaviors that we want to change. But the fact of the matter is, those aren't the real problems. The outward displays of behavior are not the real problems. The real problem is the underlying emotional state that the dog is in that is causing the dog to behave in the way that it is. So whatever is causing your dog to be fearful, anxious, aggressive, reactive, we're going to call those triggers. So the sound of fireworks, that is a trigger for a dog that has noise, fears, phobias, anxiety, and sensitivities to certain noises. When we're talking about an aggressive dog, a trigger might be a strange person. Another trigger might be a strange dog, a certain location, a toy, an object, food. A person? Yeah, they can protect and be aggressive towards others protecting another person or another pet in the home. So there's lots of different triggers. I want you to think about triggers in terms of there are sound triggers, there are visual triggers, and then there are tactile or touch triggers. Now, we're also going to be talking about distance, right? That makes a big difference. Those of you that have dogs that might be dog aggressive or reactive on walks know this. Distance matters, right? You could be at a certain distance and maybe your dogs see the other strange dogs that are out there, right? But they might be far enough away where your dog doesn't care. But then you get into a certain distance, what I call the dog's circumference of discomfort. And we can reverse that and talk about a dog's circumference of comfort, meaning how far away does the trigger need to be when it's visual for the dog not to be experiencing any emotional upset and distress. Changing that underlying emotional state, when that changes, the behavior is going to change. And so counter conditioning and desensitization is about exposing your dogs to the triggers that cause them anxiety, fears, phobias, aggression, reactivity. Counter conditioning and desensitization are exposure therapy, but done in a very particular, very specific way to help get your dog used to and more comfortable and more relaxed with the trigger. And to try to pair this trigger that your dog views as negative, as fearful, as scary, as something it needs to maybe aggress or run from, your dog has to have a shift in its emotions. As long as your dog's underlying emotional state is one of fear, anxiety, phobias, aggression, reactivity, those behaviors that we're trying to dissipate or get rid of or minimize are not going away unless we change the underlying emotional state. Now, let me talk about punishment for a second before we get into the meat and potatoes. And trust me, I'm going to get into the meat and potatoes. But one of the things that we have to talk about before we can get into the counter conditioning, before we can get into desensitization, is we need to have a discussion briefly about punishment. And I'll use a substitute word for punishment, and I'll say the word correction. Because quite frankly, when most trainers use the word correction, they're talking about using some kind of aversive. They're talking about some kind of punishment. Maybe it's a leash correction. Maybe it's a correction with an electronic collar. Maybe they're yelling no at the dog. Okay? With aggressive dogs for a long time, they were misdiagnosed, they were mislabeled as dominant. Every aggressive dog, dominant, dominant, dominant. Very few dogs are dominant. Almost all aggression and reactivity is based in fear. I'll say that again. Almost all aggression and reactivity is based in fear. Listen, no dog, well, quite frankly, no animal goes into fight or flight unless they perceive something as threatening. I'll say that again. No animal, no human, no dog, no cat, no animal goes into fight or flight unless they perceive something as a threat. Now, there doesn't have to be a real threat. Just the perception of threat. And that perception, see, it wouldn't be abnormal for an animal to be aggressive when there's a real threat. it wouldn't be abnormal for a dog to be anxious or fearful when there's a real threat. So there's two things we look at. One, is there a real threat or is there an imagined threat? Real threats are normal, and we need to help our dogs not experience threatening situations. When we begin to work on the triggers, whether it's fireworks, whether it's aggression, whether it's being afraid to ride in the car, whether it's being afraid to get groomed, going to the vet, whether it's separation anxiety, noise sensitivity, fear of people or other dogs, aggression towards other people or other dogs, in-home aggression, aggression towards the owner. Doesn't matter what it is. Again, if there's fears, phobias, aggression or reactivity or anxiety, we have to change the emotional state. Punishment or corrections, if you want to use that word, something that uses an aversive. What's an aversive? Anything that causes even the slightest bit of fear, pain, or intimidation. Even low-level leash and collar corrections, if they cause any level of fear, pain, or intimidation, we're going to call that punishment or a correction. Doesn't matter what the tool is. I don't care if you yell at your dog, no. If it causes any level of fear, anxiety, if it causes any kind of stress, intimidation, pain, could be emotional pain, right? Yelling no. It's going to be a correction. It's going to be punishment. Now, corrections, punishment are not going to help you. Obviously, you know it's not going to help you with a fearful dog, right? But a lot of people, and even a lot of well-intentioned trainers that are not certified, that aren't well formally educated, they've got good intentions, but they think that punishing the dog, giving the dog a correction, is going to correct and end the reactivity or the aggression. And the problem with that is you're only suppressing that outward behavior. You're not doing anything about changing the underlying emotional state of the dog. So if you're just suppressing behavior, imagine this. Imagine you've got a pot of boiling water on the stove, okay? And the boiling water is the reactivity or the aggression. That's the behavior. What's causing that behavior is the dog's underlying fear or anxiety, or the dog perceiving that trigger as a threat. Remember, no animal goes into fight or flight unless they perceive something as threatening. Now, when that dog perceives that threat, that doesn't go away when you punish the dog. Matter of fact, it makes the dog more fearful and more anxious and makes the dog feel less empowered and more vulnerable, more at risk. But because of fear, because of pain or intimidation, any level, whatever it takes, every dog's different. You know, you could point at some dogs and they fall apart. Some dogs, you could practically hit them upside the head with a baseball bat and they think it's fun. No, I'm not advocating you do that. But what I'm trying to say is different dogs have different temperaments, and corrections and punishments can be very different. Things that a dog views aversive, things that would cause a dog any level of stress, fear, pain, or intimidation, is going to be different for each dog. But we need to avoid the temptation to punish because it's easy and it's quick and it doesn't take much work. But it will not last, if it even helps you. For a lot of dogs, it's just going to make them more aggressive. It's going to ruin your relationship with them, and they may start going after you if they're aggressive or reactive. But punishment's just suppressing the outward behavior. It's doing nothing about the underlying root cause. So with that pot of boiling water, the underlying cause, or what's causing the boiling, the behavior, is the fire underneath the pot of boiling water. Now imagine that fire is the underlying emotional state of the dog. Until you put out the fire, you're not going to stop the behavior. Until you deal with the underlying emotional state of the dog and change that into a positive emotional state that's paired and associated with the trigger, that behavior is not going away. What happens with punishment? What happens with the correction? It's like putting a lid on the top of that pot of boiling water. We don't see the behavior, do we? We don't see the lunging, the barking, the snapping, the attempts at biting, perhaps when we use aversive punishment and correction techniques. Temporarily, we don't see it. But because we didn't deal with the underlying root cause, the underlying emotional state, because we didn't put out the fire on that pot of boiling water, because we chose punishment and correction, putting a lid on top of that, we've suppressed the behavior. We don't see the boiling water. It's not until we turn off the fire, the heat underneath that pot of boiling water, does that behavior really go away. What happens when a lid is put on the top of a boiling water, or a pot of boiling water, is the same thing that happens to a dog that has punishment for aggression. The pressure builds, the pressure builds and builds and builds, and the pressure builds, and it might be a day, it might be a week, it might be 2 weeks, it might be a month, it might be 3 months. But at some point, that pressure builds to a certain stage, and the dog snaps. At some point, that pressure becomes too much, and the lid pops off the pot of boiling water. Punishment correction does not work. That's going to make things worse. Again, you may have quick results. You may see videos of trainers using that and see quick results. What you're not seeing is it's temporary. It'll come back to bite you in the butt. I mean, no pun intended, but it's short term. So that's talking a little bit about punishment as it relates to aggressive and reactive dogs. Now, on the other end, we've got the dogs that are pure fear and they go into retreat. Remember, it's fight or flight. Fear, you get a dog that's fearful, trapped, and it's got no way out to escape, they can turn into fight very quickly. The most fearful of dogs. Remember, I said all aggression's based in fear. No animal goes into fight or flight unless it perceives something as a threat. Now, we talked about things that we need to desensitize your dog to. The things that we need to expose your dogs to are usually a visual trigger, an auditory trigger, or some kind of a tactile trigger, and distances involved when it comes to visual triggers. Pressure, duration of pressure, touch is involved with tactile triggers or touch triggers. When we're dealing with auditory or sound triggers, we're talking about volume. And that's about exposing. So let me start with some sound phobias. We're typically going to start with recorded sounds. Maybe your dog has a fear of fireworks. Maybe your dog has a fear of thunderstorms. We're going to start playing those sounds at the lowest volume possible, where your dog can hear the sounds. I don't care what the sound is, doesn't matter. The principles are the same. We're going to begin playing it at the lowest volume possible that your dog can hear it. But here's the kicker. Here's what's critical. At that volume, your dog can have no fear, no anxiety, no stress. Your dog must be relaxed. Your dog must be able to focus on you, play with you, respond to cues and commands from you, eat food from you, and basically your dog can't have a care in the world. Now, it's not just about us playing the sounds. If we just played sound and did nothing more, and we did that at a very, very, very low volume, and over a very long period of time, we very, very, very gradually brought that volume up, that would be desensitization. Eventually, over time, give enough time, most animals will become desensitized if they're exposed. Exposing them, though, to get desensitization, it needs to be done gradually. It needs to be done systematically. not flooding. You know, the term flooding in psychology would be, well, let's say we've got somebody with a fear of water. It would be just that, throwing them in the water versus getting them used to maybe imagining themselves near water and imagining themselves just putting their toes in the water. And then eventually doing those baby steps where there's real water. And a little bit at a time, gradually, systematically, we move forward baby steps. But each step of the way, your dog, as we move ahead, so if it's a noise or a sound phobia, as we bring the volume up, each time the volume goes up, your dog has to be in that state of doesn't have a care in the world, is completely relaxed, will take food from you, will respond to cues and commands from you, doesn't have a care in the world. Here is the sounds, even though they went up a little bit, but there's no stress, there's no anxiety whatsoever. Anytime you bring the volume up and your dog starts to experience even the slightest bit of stress, the slightest bit of anxiety or fear, you have brought that volume up too high too soon. You've got to do it gradually. It's the same thing if we've got a dog that's aggressive or fearful towards people or dogs. That's a visual cue, not an auditory cue. So with a visual cue, it's about starting out, presenting, exposing that strange dog or that strange person at a distance, far enough away from your dog that your dog can see the trigger. Maybe it's a dog, maybe it's a person, maybe it's both. Whatever that visual trigger is, your dog can see it, but it's far enough away your dog doesn't have a care in the world. Your dog's completely relaxed. I'll say this over and over. It'll take food from you. It will focus on you. It will stay with you. It doesn't want to run away or run towards that thing. It's not showing any anxiety, not showing any fear, not showing any stress. It's relaxed. Doesn't have a care in the world. That's the distance that you start. And again, just like with noise phobias, with aggression and reactivity, and with distance issues, with the triggers, gradually, systematically, very slowly over a long period of time, taking small little baby steps, you will get closer and closer to that visual trigger. In this case, we're using the example of a strange dog or a person. And in this case, the dog could be fearful or aggressive. Doesn't matter. Little by little, we're getting your dog closer to the trigger. But every step of the way, when we go closer, again, your dog can't have any concern. Your dog can't have any care in the world. Completely relaxed, or this will not work. Trust me, there's a distance you can get to where your dog's completely relaxed and will see the trigger. There is a volume you can bring auditory triggers down to where your dog can hear it but doesn't have a care in the world. That's where you start. And every time you inch forward, whether it's an auditory trigger or a visual trigger, you've got to go very slow, baby steps. And again, you have to watch your dog. At any point your dog gets nervous or anxious, experiences any stress, you've gone too far too soon. You need to back up. Now, we've just been talking about the general basic idea of gradual and systematic desensitization. Counter conditioning is what we need to use to get to that desensitization. We want to change that underlying emotional state. We want to change the dog's fear and anxiety of the trigger, change that to something where when the trigger is present, the dog views the trigger as something good, as something positive, something that it likes, if nothing else, something neutral. Okay? And how we're going to do that is we're going to pair with really good timing the trigger with super high value food rewards. Now, if you have a dog that is not very food motivated, you need to find something something that it will love. I like to use canned chicken. I like to put it in a blender. I put a little bit of chicken broth or water in there, and I make a really yummy chicken paste. You can make any kind of meat paste you want. Doesn't have to be chicken. And then I get these squeeze tubes, 6 ounce or an 8 ounce squeeze tube on Amazon, similar to the squeeze tubes that you might have mustard or ketchup in. It's got a nozzle. And when I'm doing and I'm only using this for counter conditioning and desensitization. So I make that chicken paste, I put it in the squeeze bottle. And when I am pairing, when I am exposing the dog to the triggers, as soon as the trigger happens, feeding starts. I start this steady little stream of yummy, lickable chicken paste that comes out of the squeeze bottle. So if I'm using counter conditioning, pairing something positive, the dog's conditioned right now that it's a bad thing, the trigger. We're going to counter that conditioning and turn it into something that the dog has a positive emotional state. Right now, it doesn't. We're going to do that by pairing food and making it a very, very clear association. And that's part of what's going to allow you to have success, is making it a clear association. Okay? So let's start with a sound phobia. I don't care. Let's say it's thunderstorms, or it is the sound of garbage trucks, or it is the sound of the fire alarm, or it's the sound of the leaf blower or the garbage disposal. It doesn't matter what the sound is. You can find just about any sound on YouTube, and you can play that at very low volume. And the process, what you want to do to get your dog over that fear of the sound. Again, you press play. The volume is at a level that the dog does not have a care in the world. As soon as you press play, as soon as the sound starts, you begin feeding. And you feed constantly and a continuous stream of this yummy chicken paste or whatever meat paste you have. The whole time the sound is happening, the dog is getting yummy stuff, and then press stop. And then immediately stop feeding. And wait a few seconds. Then get that sound going again. Press play. As soon as the sound starts again, feed constantly and continuously for about 1 to 3 seconds. Press stop. And immediately when the sound stops, stop feeding. And you're going to repeat that over and over at that same very low volume that your dog does not have a care in the world. Press play. As soon as the sound starts, feed, extremely high value food rewards constantly and continuously for about 1 to 3 seconds of sound duration. Then press stop and immediately stop feeding. Now, you're going to do this for about 5 to 10 minutes every day. Watch your dog's body language. Make sure your dog is very relaxed, or this won't work. Make sure that you're hiding your food behind your back. Do not present the food until the sound begins. And then as soon as the sound stops, get rid of that food. Get it out of sight. Put it behind your back again. And if you want to make it even more clear for your dog, the association, press play of a different sound your dog does not have a fear of and don't feed, and then press stop. Press play of a different sound. Do not feed. Press stop. Press play on the sound that your dog has issues with and feed constantly and continuously for 1 to 3 seconds. Then stop the sound, then stop the feeding. We need to associate those high-value food rewards with the thing that the dog finds scary, with the trigger. In this case, it's a sound. Now, you're going to work at that sound for about 1 to 2 weeks. It should get to the point where when you press play, your dog should start getting excited and look for the food. If that doesn't happen, you're either working at a level that's too loud, or your food is not yummy enough, or you haven't done the initial conditioning long enough. But after 2 weeks, hopefully we've got your dog looking at you when it hears the sound, and then you're giving the food. We know that the dog understands the game, the association game, the counter conditioning game, when it looks to you for food. At that point, now we can begin to turn the volume up just a little bit. Just a little bit. Don't get greedy. Watch your dog when it hears it. If your dog has any level of care or concern, you've gone too loud too soon. But the goal is to be able to turn it up a little bit and to start that process all over again. Every day, have a 5-minute, 10-minute training session where you're exposing to the sounds that are recorded. Press play as soon as the dog hears the sound. Feed constantly and continuously. The entire time the sound is playing, play it for about 1 to 3 seconds. As soon as the sound stops, stop feeding. Now, you have to do this every day. And this can take weeks. It can take months to get from the beginning, very, very low volume, to extremely loud volume. And if you don't have a good stereo system that can eventually get really, really loud, I'm not talking about a portable speaker. I'm talking about surround sound. I'm talking about a fantastic sound system in your house. If you don't have that, invest in your dog and enjoy it by getting yourself a new stereo system or surround sound, because you're going to need to make it sound like the real thing eventually. Gradually, systematically, little by little, you're going up and up and up in volume. Now, as you're going up in volume, I need you to sometimes do 1 or 2 exposures in that session where the volume gets brought down again. Why am I saying that? If the goal is to go up in volume, why am I saying do a couple where you go low? The reason is dogs are fantastic at understanding patterns, and we're creating a pattern. We're creating an association. Little by little, we're bringing that volume up. If the dog starts to anticipate that pattern and jumps far enough ahead, it could start becoming anxious, going, oh man, it's just going to keep getting louder and louder and louder. Oh my God. And it could start getting anxious. So you're going to vary between loud and quiet sounds. As you're getting louder, every once in a while in your training sessions, throw in some low volume sounds. You're still going to feed. The principle's the same. As soon as the trigger occurs, feed constantly and continuously for 1 to 3 seconds. Trigger stops or goes away. Feeding stops. Okay? Now, when we're talking about aggression, we're talking about sounds. If we're talking about, say, aggression towards a person or a dog, we have to be at a distance, far enough away, where your dog does not have a care in the world, but sees that visual trigger, if it's a dog or a person. And even if you've got a dog that appears to only be aggressive when somebody comes in your home, most likely you're going to have to start getting them used to strange people outside. Even if you tell me my dog's okay outside, I don't buy it. There are other reasons why your dog might be okay outside. It could be you have a leash on. It could be the fact that the space is more open. It could be the fact that you corrected or punished your dog and suppressed behavior in the past when it was outside and saw a stranger. Dogs do have less stress when they're outside. But my guess is if you've got a dog that's aggressive and reactive every time a stranger comes in your house, there's no way in hell your dog is completely comfortable with strangers outside. There's something that you are not seeing in their body language if you think they're okay. And let me say this, if you want to be successful with counter conditioning and desensitization, if you want to be successful with exposure therapy for your dog, you've got to understand canine body language. And I'm talking about in depth. You need to get a book. You need to take an online course. There's a great canine body language book by Brenda Aloff called Canine Body Language, an illustrated guide. You can get that on Amazon. Also at crimsonhound.com, they've got 2 online courses for canine body language, one for pet parents, one for pet professionals. Hey, if you've got a dog with lots of fear, anxiety, phobias, aggression, or reactivity, take the pet professional course. You need it. Because we can't ask your dog, hey, how you feeling? And they're going to verbalize back to us how they're feeling. There are dozens, and I mean dozens, of very tiny, very little, subtle, what I call even tics, canine body language cues that lets you know if a dog is experiencing any anxiety, if the dog's experiencing any fears. We all know the big signs, right? Hackles go up, dog showing its teeth, lunges, barking, growling. The fearful dog runs away, panting, drooling, pacing. We know the big signs of canine body language as it relates to stress, but there are dozens of little tiny signs that even most dog trainers don't know. And remember, I said that when we begin exposing your dog to the trigger, and as we get your dog more and more exposed to the triggers, as we get closer to visual triggers, as we bring up the volume on auditory triggers, we have to make sure that at each step of the way, your dog does not have a care in the world. There's no stress, no anxiety. If you don't have a thorough, great understanding of canine body language, you're not going to see those things. You are going to miss that subtle communication. Your dog is saying, hey, I don't want to do this. I'm scared. And you're going to be wasting a lot of time. Yes, we want to work hard. And we have to put the time in. It's not easy. If nothing else, it's inconvenient over a period of 3 to 6 months and in very severe cases. We've got to put the time in. We want to work hard, but we've got to work smart. And it's all about making associations and what's the underlying emotional state that the dog's in as we're making associations. If the dog's even slightly anxious or nervous, this is not going to work. Or it's going to take a very, 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 very long time, and you're going to get minimal success. Now, let me talk about some nuances when it comes to exposing your dog, doing counter conditioning and desensitization if your dog has fears and phobias or is reactive and aggressive towards strange people, strange dogs, or other visual stimuli. It's going to be almost identical to what we did with the sound phobia. The visual trigger is going to come into view, and we need to start this typically outside. At a distance far enough away that when your dog sees the visual cue, in this case, we're using the example of a strange dog or a strange person, you may have an aggressive dog or a fearful dog. The distance you need to start from is at that distance, again, where your dog does not have a care in the world, and you need to understand canine body language to be successful. I've got an article on my website, dogbehaviorist.com, and it's about thresholds, and it's about understanding canine body language and understanding thresholds to be successful with counter conditioning and desensitization. So go to dogbehaviorist.com, go to the article section, pull down that article, thresholds. Now, when your dog is showing any level of care and concern, any level of anxiety, stress, your dog's over threshold. When your dog begins to experience the stress, I'm going to say your dog's over threshold. A lot of trainers will say, oh, no, your dog's got to be way fearful or way reactive. No. Look at the underlying emotional state. Look at the canine body language of the little tiny subtle stress signals. I don't want to try to take that emotional state. How can I take a disempowered state and pair it with something that the dog's going to love and make that positive? The exposed trigger needs to be neutral emotionally, and you pair that with something very positive over and over and over, gradually, systematically, slowly, bringing that distance, closing that distance. Very slowly, very gradually. Again, remember, if you start going closer, and at any time you get closer and your dog's showing any level of anxiety or concern, you've gone too close too soon. Now, when it comes to certain visual triggers, we may need sometimes to present a different trigger that, or a different visual stimuli that does not trigger your dog, and pair high-value food rewards only with the trigger stimuli and not the non-trigger stimuli. Let me give you an example. Let's say that part of what we were doing in counter conditioning and desensitization was getting the dog used to somebody coming to the door. And let's say we could get your dog far enough away from the door that when we started at the door, your dog didn't have a care in the world. Okay? We open the door, the dog sees the trigger, and feed constantly and continuously for 1 to 3 seconds happens. Then that visual trigger, we'll say it's a person in this scenario, goes away, goes out of sight. And as soon as that person is out of sight, the feeding stops. Well, what if the dog thinks it's the front door opening up that causes the feeding and not the stranger? Because every time the door opens, right, and the dog gets fed. To bring clarity to the situation, we would sometimes open that door and there'd be a human being that the dog really loves and is very familiar with. And when that door opens and they see that person, there would be no feeding for 1 to 3 seconds. Then that person would walk away or the door gets closed. They're no longer there. Then we go back to the real trigger, the strange person that the dog would normally be aggressive towards. We open that door and boom, we start feeding 1 to 3 seconds constantly and continuously. As soon as that person starts to move away, we stop feeding. When we're talking about touch sensitivities, dogs that don't like to be groomed or touched, you're going to start by at a distance just showing your hand and pairing that with food. Hand away, no food. Hand shows up, feed. Hand away, stop feeding. Then maybe I bring my hand a little bit closer and a little bit closer. But again, every time my hand appears or starts moving, I'm going to feed constantly and continuously 1 to 3 seconds. Then the hand goes away and the feeding stops. If my dog, because before I can touch the dog, I got to start way far away, right? Because if you've got a dog with touch sensitivity, you know this. There is a certain distance where your dog starts getting uncomfortable when your hand gets there. You need to start working just behind that, just further away where the dog doesn't have a care in the world. The principle is going to be the same. Little by little, you are going to get closer and closer. You're pairing high-value food rewards with the trigger. Here's the hand. Feed. Hand goes away. Stop feeding. Before you can touch, you've got to get your hand close. And then when it comes to touching, you would start by super soft, little to no pressure, and super brief duration. And the touch, feed. Then we would start adding duration before we'd add more pressure. Very light touch. Feed, 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 feed. Stop feeding. Once we get to the point where we can keep touching all over at a very light touch, now we go to the area that the dog has the least amount of care and concern about being touched, and we start adding a tiny bit of pressure. Short duration, go back to short duration when you do harder pressure touch, and then build up the duration with that. But you're going to start with harder touch, more pressure, brief duration. And again, watch the body language. At any point, your dog starts having a care and a concern, you've gone too far too soon. You need to back up. Nail clipping starts with maybe showing the clippers first at a distance, little by little, getting it closer and closer and closer. Then maybe touching part of the body, not the foot. Then barely touching the foot. And again, you may have to spend weeks and months just working on getting that clippers closer and closer and closer and closer to the dog. Then it's brief touch. Then it's longer duration touch. Then it's adding a little pressure briefly. Then it's adding pressure with longer duration. Then after that, it becomes moving your hand around the dog with light touch and then adding more pressure. But again, guys, you've got to do this very gradually, very systematically, super slow. And at any point in time, your dog starts showing anxiety, nervousness, you've gotten greedy. You've gone too far too soon. Back up. This should be a fun thing for your dog. This should be the most fun activity your dog does all day long. And if your dog is doing other things that are fun and your dog's having more fun, you need to stop that for now. The highlight of your dog's day needs to be this training. This is not easy work. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of commitment. When it comes to counter conditioning and desensitizing your dog to other people and other dogs, think about this. You need helpers. You need strange people and strange dogs every day to do the work. I know how damn hard that can be. Here's the good news. If it starts at a big distance, for quite a while, you'll be able to use mannequins and you'll be able to use very realistic looking stuffed dogs as the trigger. But as you get closer, typically when you get within 20 or 30 feet, you're going to need to start having a real human helper. You're going to need a real strange dog helper. And those dogs and human helpers must be strangers to your dog. No, you cannot use somebody the dog knows. They know it's not a stranger. They can smell the difference. But you can use a mannequin, and I'm telling you, get a mannequin. Get some realistic looking fake stuffed dogs. Hide them from your dog. Make sure you dress the mannequin. I had a client that was doing this, not dressing the mannequin. Imagine what your neighbors are going to think. But once you get close, you've got to have real people and real dogs. During the time you're working with the mannequin, during the time you're working with the fake dogs, you need to be recruiting and soliciting and getting human helpers and real dog helpers so that you have them down the road. Once you get to that point, then maybe you only need to do it 3 to 5 times a week, but you have to do it a minimum of 3 times a week, or this is not going to happen. Now, one of the things I didn't talk about that I should have in the beginning, in order to make this work, you have to avoid all of the triggers. I mean, completely avoid the triggers, except when you're exposing the trigger to the dog in a training situation where you're controlling the exposure. And we keep your dog below threshold. There's no stress. We have to control the exposure. If you like to take your dog for walks and your dog is being aggressive and reactive on walks, and you're walking your dog every day, this is not going to work. Imagine if the problem wasn't your dog's behavior. Imagine if the problem was we had flooding in the house. And the reason that we had flooding in the house is because we had a broken pipe. And we've got to fix the broken pipe, like we've got to fix your dog, right? The first thing that we have to do, if we're going to be successful fixing that broken pipe, the first thing we have to do is completely turn off the water. Turn off the water all the way. How are we going to fix that broken water pipe if water keeps leaking out? We're going to be working very hard, but we're not working smart. It's not going to happen. And when I say you need to avoid all triggers, I mean avoid all triggers. And I realize that can be hard. You know, I've got clients that live in apartment complexes and their dogs are aggressive towards strange people and dogs. And they've got to take the dog out. Dog's got to go to the bathroom. You've got to get creative. They've got to go outside before they take the dog out, make sure nobody's around. They've got to find areas to go to the bathroom that are more secluded. They've got to have an emergency plan. If a trigger comes, what are they going to do? They need to move the hell away. Remember, distance. Further away, the less anxious, the less fearful, the less likely the dog will be aggressive, reactive, or fearful. If every day your dog is looking out a window and your dog is being reactive to people and dogs going by, this is not going to work. You need to have window coverings. Keep the dog out of that room. You can't have people over and have your dog being aggressive and reactive and think that you're going to be able to work on getting your dog not to be aggressive and reactive. You've got to avoid the triggers. They are working against us big time. And think about this. You are setting your dog up for failure. You know these triggers. You know what's going to happen to your dog. Why would you do that? Denial. We all think that it's just going to work itself out one day. It's not going to work itself out. It works itself out when you work the plan, when you work the program. Go to my website at dogbehaviorist.com. I've got lots of different articles. Go to the article section. Check out the article on thresholds and canine body language. There's also an article on counter conditioning and desensitization. I've done one previous podcast. It was just an audio podcast on the Pet Talk Today podcast. You would do a Google search for Pet Talk Today, and you can look for episode 81. I did an hour and a half on counter conditioning and desensitization. I wanted to do this one because I thought I could do maybe a better job this time. The other thing that we need to talk about is, in some cases, the fears, the phobias, the aggression is so severe, you can't do the behavior modification work. It's so severe, you can't get the dog below threshold. Doesn't matter how far away you present the trigger, doesn't matter how low the volume is. Or you're doing everything right with your training, and you've been doing it for 2 months and you're making little to no progress at all. That might be an indication that your dog may need some medication. A lot of these dogs that are really severe with aggression, fears, phobias, there's a neurochemical imbalance that's a component. You should all be having your dogs checked out by your vet in the first place. Make sure there's no painful conditions. Make sure there's no problems with their hearing or vision. Make sure they're not feeling yucky, that they're sick. You know what a lot of people overlook is oral pain, dental pain. 11% of people that are bit reaching out to pet a dog are because the dog has severe oral pain. So a lot of times we don't know our dogs are in pain, and now they've got bigger space issues and they feel threatened or vulnerable when maybe some trigger comes towards them, and they might be reactive and aggressive. But getting back to the potential of a neurochemical imbalance, and a lot of you folks have rescue dogs, and we don't know their complete history and background. And a lot of these dogs have had a lot of trauma. Just like humans can get PTSD, so can these dogs. And neurochemically, we know by research that dogs with fears, phobias, anxieties, aggression have low levels of serotonin. They have low levels of serotonin. We know that we've got to boost that. Now, again, the less severe cases, they may not need medication. I gave you some examples of, hey, you're working for 2 months and you're not getting anywhere. Or it's so severe you cannot get your dog below threshold to do the work. You need to either go to your own veterinarian and talk about some behavioral medicine, or you need to see a veterinary behaviorist. And a lot of you guys, even though I'm trying to present this with a lot of details for you, don't be embarrassed. Don't be upset if you need professional help. This is not easy stuff to do on your own. Okay? If you need professional help, make sure that they know what they're doing. Make sure you're hiring at a minimum a certified dog behavior consultant, or a certified animal behavior consultant, or a certified behaviorist. Make sure they've got an academic background in behavior. Knowledge means something. Again, there's a lot of very well-intentioned trainers out there, but this is an industry that's not regulated, so anybody can call themselves a trainer. There are no requirements of education, standards. Anybody can say they're a trainer. You need to do research and make sure you've got somebody that, A, doesn't use punishment, understands what counterconditioning and desensitization is, has been doing this for quite a while, has experience working with this population of dogs that have anxiety, fears, phobias, and aggression, and that they've got good formal education and they are certified. The International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants, the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers, those are the two agencies that certify behavior consultants. The Animal Behavior Society, they certify dog behaviorists, animal behaviorists. Those are places to start to look for professional help. If you can't find anybody to help you, you can contact me. I do this work with people virtually. Through live video conference, we do consultations, we do coaching throughout the whole process, and we're very successful. It's really about teaching and training you. You need the good teacher. I don't need to be there. So you can go to dogbehaviorist.com. You can always fill out my contact form, shoot me an email, info@dogbehaviorist.com if you need help. Now, another thing that might help, for those dogs that aren't as severe, for those dogs that might not need medication but need something, Calm Dogs at calmdogs.com. Calm Dogs is actually a supplement that I created. It's my own creation. It took me 5 years to research and put together a formula that actually worked for dogs. There's so many natural calming aids, or what they call calming aids, that are supposed to help your dog out there. And quite frankly, 99% of them don't work. I know this because I've tried everything that's out there. I know this because my clients have tried everything that's out there. Not every dog needs Prozac or behavior medicine, so I created Calm Dogs. And I'm telling you, it's not just because I created it, but this is definitely the world's most effective calming aid without a prescription. Nothing comes close to it. We've done research. We've done studies. 98% of dogs that take Calm Dogs twice daily for 6 weeks have decreased anxiety. 98%. Doesn't work fast. Takes time to build up. It's not going to help every dog either. If it's super severe, your dog might need medication. But it's going to help. Go to calmdogs.com. You can learn more about the Calm Dog supplement. And go to Calm Dogs. Oh, one thing, I'm so convinced that my product will help your dog. It comes with a 100% money back guarantee. My promise to you is very, very simple. And it's this. Either Calm Dogs helps and works for your dog, or it's free. You get your money back. But really study what you need to do. Go back, listen to this more than once. Remember what I said about the importance of canine body language. And again, you may need some professional help. This is not easy work. It works. It works. Even in super severe cases, this works. I've been doing this for over 30 years. This is all evidence-based. It's based in science. These techniques have been around forever. We know they work. So take the information that you've learned here, apply it to whatever your particular situation is. Keep coming back every Saturday for Pet Talk Today, my regular show. I'm here on Facebook. I'm live every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern time for 1 hour, where I take your questions and I answer your behavior and training questions and give you positive solutions to help you with your dogs. I would love to see you back each and every Saturday. Also, you can subscribe to the Audio Pet Talk Today podcast. Sometimes I'll do podcasts there that are not video, that are not on Facebook. So you can do a Google search for Pet Talk Today. I'm Will Bangura. I appreciate the fact that everybody's been here checking out what I'm doing. I know this was impromptu, but I wanted to put together another session where I'm talking about in-depth counter conditioning and desensitization because it is one of the most important things that you could possibly do for your dog. So practice, practice, practice. It's going to take some time, but it'll be worth it. Have a great day.